morning, everyone. It was really wonderful to see a lot of you at the opening reception last night. It was such a wonderful and amazing start to a great week. We're so pleased to have you join us in this great city of Portland, Oregon. Our first, This is our first Bikeshare conference hosted by a smart Bikeshare system city. We encourage you to take advantage of your Biketown Pass and the wonderful bicycle infrastructure that Portland has to offer.
With the constantly changing landscape of the bike-share industry this year, there couldn't be a better time for this conference. The joint NAPSA BBSP conference is the one time in the year where the entire industry gets to come together and meet each other and learn more how to make bike-share better.
We kicked off the conference yesterday with exciting and informative workshops. Today and tomorrow are filled with an action-packed agenda of breakout sessions. Friday we'll hold the NAPSA annual meeting. Mixed in, we have phenomenal plenaries. We'll have another reception for you to enjoy and numerous opportunities for networking. I want to give a special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Jump, and the JPB Foundation. Without them, this conference would not be possible.
Together, we define and create the bike-share industry in North America and across the globe. Our future is shared. Warm welcomes to everyone, and thank you for coming. And next up, I would like to welcome Mark Runkle, the Chief Staff of the Office of Portland Transportation Commissioner Chloe U. Daly. Welcome.
All right, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Marshall Runkle. I'm the Chief of Staff for City Commissioner Chloe U. Daly. She has responsibility for the Transportation Department here in Portland. I think I'm literally the least qualified person in the room to be talking to you, so I'm just here to welcome you to Portland and say a couple of remarks that Steve Hoyt Macbeth wrote for me. So if you have a problem, talk to Steve about what I'm saying. The mayor and my boss would be here this morning to do a better job of reading Steve's remarks. But it's the time that the Portland City Council meets every week on Wednesday morning. So thank you, Wafia and Sam, on behalf of the Portland Transportation Commissioner U. Daly. Welcome to Portland. I want to thank the staff of NABSA and the Better Bike Share Partnership. Did I get that right? Yeah. Sam, Wafia, Zoe, Kirkos? All right. And the Conference Planning Committee for all of your hard work. Let me recognize Dorothy Mitchell, the General Manager of Motivate, and her fantastic team that operate Biketown. I also want to recognize our title sponsor, Nike, who we're even more proud of than usual this week. The technology was developed in Eugene, but the company was founded here in Portland, Oregon. Also want to recognize our healthcare sponsor, Kaiser Permanente. We like to think that Portland is where bicycle innovation happens in North America, but I think most of you are aware that Portland wasn't the first city with the bike share. We were 64th. We had a lot of time to learn from other North American systems to steal some of your ideas. It's the most sincere form of flattery, and come up with some new things of our own. For one, we've utilized the flexibility of Jump's smart bike architecture. We started experimenting from day one with Biketown for All membership for these Portlanders living on low incomes. Biketown is a completely dockless system. Knowing that low-income communities are particularly sensitive to additional fees, waived all costs for parking outside a station or even out of the service area. Partially as a result, our Biketown for All members average 100 trips per year. Since May, we made 20% of our system dockless, which we call super hub zones. We've seen trips increase dramatically within these zones. To attract new riders, this year we made Biketown free for everyone for the entire month of May. This Ride Free in May promotion broke our single-day record 9 times. Over 11,000 Portland locals tried Biketown for the first time. We've kept this dockless benefit as a perk for our annual members. You can learn more about this from Dorothy at Motivate later this afternoon at the Price is Right session. There's prizes, I hear. We've also leveraged Portland's extensive investment in bike parking infrastructure. Biketown has added 35 additional stations at no additional cost. We did this by taking our bike corrals, clusters of on-street bike racks, and geofencing them as hybrid Bikeshare stations. We've also tried to push the envelope on public policy. For residents and workers in 2 of our parking districts, we've used parking permit revenue to deeply discount a package of bus, light rail, streetcar, and bike share passes, what we call the transportation wallet. In these parking districts, we've seen parking permit numbers go down and bike and transit ridership go up. I encourage you to check out PBOT's Joey Posada's presentation about the transportation wallet on Thursday afternoon. No prizes at that one. And lastly, we've tried to quickly learn from our mistakes. At launch, Biketown did not provide an option for people with disabilities. The community quickly let us know, I think that was my boss, that we messed up. We then engaged the community to design a program based on their needs. With the support of Community Advisory Committee, Nike, and our nonprofit bike shop partner, Kerr Bikes, we launched Adaptive Biketown in July 2017. Adaptive Biketown has been popular from the start, and we doubled our rides in 2018, and we just added 2 adaptive e-bikes. Adaptive Biketown is bringing the joy of bicycling to new people. For half of our customers with disabilities, Adaptive Biketown was their first experience riding an adaptive bicycle, and many of them have become return riders. Lastly, Portland is a great biking city, but it's also a great place to eat, drink, and play, and there's no sales tax. Please find time to enjoy all that our city and region has to offer, and be sure to take some bike rides outside of downtown into the neighborhoods and get a feel for our neighborhood main streets and neighborhood greenways. Thanks very much for being here. Enjoy the conference.
Thanks, Marshall. And good tip on the sales tech. I'm going to take advantage of that while I'm here. Next, I would like to welcome our presenting sponsor, Jump, Ryan Rzepecki, the founder and CEO of Jump. And fun fact about Ryan, he has written Bikeshare in 4 different continents. So if you have time, ask him what those continents are. Welcome, Ryan.
So it's great to be here in Portland. For us, it was a very marquee project in 2016. We're very thankful that Steve and PBOT took a chance on us, which at the time, smart bike was still kind of an emerging technology, and a lot of people, and probably in this room, were skeptical that we were going to be able to pull it all off. But it came together quite well, and we had a chance to work with Motivate and Dorothy and her team, and they did a terrific job. I do think if you went back 2 years in a time machine and told Steve that 2 years later your contract would be provided by Uber and operated by Lyft, I don't know what his reaction would be, but it just shows how quickly the industry is moving and how exciting some of these changes are. Going back just 1 year to some remarks that I gave last year, I highlighted 3 things that I thought were big industry trends that I think are still very relevant today, and that's 1, a transition from dock bikes to smart bikes. You now even see Motivate and PBSC working on smart bike technology and testing that as a mix for their fleet. You see more and more cities exploring a permitting model rather than just doing the exclusive RFP route. And more vendors are bringing electric bikes to market. You've seen the pedal bike usage kind of remain flat, and then e-bikes really taking off and getting traction. What I didn't foresee last year was that scooters would be the new, and the amazing adoption that those have been seeing, and the amazing stress that that's causing our cities as well. And so I think that's something that we should all be thinking about and talking about this conference, and what is the mandate of this organization. Is it about broader mobility, or is it specifically bicycles? So, just when you think you have everything figured out, there's something new on the horizon each year that's challenging us all. I think last year, these were the type of images that everybody was most afraid of, that China was just going to drop bikes on every 2 feet of pavement across every city globally. That did play out to some extent, particularly in China, where there was a mass flooding of bikes. But it's really slowed down over the last year. Mobike was acquired by another Chinese company and has been focused on the Chinese market. OFO's been pulling out of US and European cities. And the folks that started in the US with pedal bikes have shifted their focus to scooters primarily. You did see that boom and bust cycle in China, and then kind of a mini boom and bust cycle in the US in a few places that did launch without any regulation. They saw the flooding of bikes and they saw that retreat. But I don't think, even if a few early companies didn't exactly have the right model and burned through too much capital or didn't do things the right way, that doesn't mean that we're not in the middle of a big change that's going to last many years. There's just so much capital going into the space, so many providers, so many new entrants, and so much new technology. This is going to be a sustaining trend for a long time. Whether the form factor might change from bikes to electric bikes to scooters to whatever the next new format is, it's clear that there's a ton of investment going into the space. And with big players like Uber and Lyft and the balance sheets that they have putting into this business, I think we can say pretty confidently for the next 5 or 10 years, there's going to be new ways of doing business, which is really exciting, but also really challenging, because change is hard. Change is hard for cities. Change is hard for big companies. Change is even hard for small companies like our company and what we went through last year. There were 5 moves that we had to make to set us up for success in this new context. And I'll share them because I think they're somewhat relevant for other people in the industry. First, we moved toward vertical integration. The idea before in this industry is there's an equipment supplier, there was a city that was kind of often the owner of the program, and then there was the operator. And really, we've all kind of experienced some of the pain points and frustrations of that and the conflicts of interest that come out of that. So we thought it was really important to vertically integrate, to own and operate, to develop the technology, to operate it, and to own it as much as possible. Secondly, we thought it was really important to build a strong consumer brand so that we can have one brand that scales across multiple markets. I think that's really challenging in Bikeshare because the previous model of Bikeshare often had a corporate sponsorship. And so you were actually rebranded something different in every city, and you actually didn't build that consumer awareness. So that's something that we moved toward and are still kind of navigating. How do you engage sponsors while still trying to build your own brand? 3, we brought electric bikes to market. We've been working on that since 2015 and finally had a product that we were proud of and brought to market in a small scale in the summer of 2017, scaled it up toward the end of 2017, and obviously had a lot of traction with it in San Francisco in early 2018. So we brought e-bikes to market. 4, we were able to raise some capital. We've been in the business. We had the idea in 2008 and incorporated in 2010. Nobody wanted to fund this space for the first 5 or 6 years of our company, and then finally all these pieces came together and the capital came in. And there's pros and cons to it, but capital is now part of our industry in a very significant way. And lastly, we decided to align ourselves with Uber. First, that was in a strategic partnership where we're going to put ourselves into the Uber app. Obviously, that materialized into something more significant where we've now been acquired by Uber. But I think it just shows that what we're doing now is part of the mobility package. It's part of a broader ecosystem. We've all been talking about multimodal systems for a long time, and it's now finally coming together. So I think our story in some ways can be, I think there's something that other people are facing, maybe different parts of that story in their own way, and we're all trying to adjust as an industry to all these changes. But the early results for us have been extremely promising. In San Francisco, we are seeing some days with over 10 trips per bike per day, and an average trip length of 2.6 miles, both of which I think are outliers for a previous model of Bikeshare. So you really see this being point-to-point transportation in the city, not just first and last mile. And you see extremely high utilization rates. And before you say, well, maybe that's just because there's only 250 bikes in San Francisco and it's just one city, we've seen these results replicated in other markets that we didn't expect. So Sacramento and Santa Cruz are both getting over 6 trips per bike per day. And these are all, for the most part, paid trips. So these are people paying per use, not just an all-you-can-eat pricing plan. So we've seen this repeated now in some of these mid-sized cities, which is really, really exciting. And it validates, for us, Uber's investment in this space, where we really want to combine rides, bikes, scooters, rental, all forms of transportation in one app experience. And I think Lyft has the same thesis, and many other companies are working from that same idea. And now we're actually doing it. It's not just about releasing white papers. It's actually about doing this and seeing some real results. So in San Francisco, in the first few months of launch, we looked at our riders that were previously just Uber riders, and then they started using Jump. And so this group of people overall used the Uber platform 15% more. So they took 15% more trips with Uber, Uber rides plus Jump rides. But the number of car trips actually went down by 10%. So they've actually used Uber more as a transportation solution, but used cars less, which is the kind of early validation that we've seen that, hey, people are really shifting mode, particularly in the morning and evening commute. So when the congestion is highest, people are shifting to bikes, which is, I think, the policy goal that we're all going toward. So how do we go from here? We think that, for me, what's great about NABSA is it brings together the public sector and the private sector in one room to kind of navigate these challenges together. And the public sector plays a massive role in making this industry successful. And so there's a couple things that I wanted to highlight that I think are important as we're thinking about this. One is, how does the private sector work with the public sector to build out more infrastructure? That's both bike lanes, but also places to park the bikes. One of the major complaints is these dockless vehicles are taking up our sidewalks and our street space. Well, for 70 years we built parking spaces and regulatory systems to park cars. We need to go through that same process now for these other modes of transportation, these other vehicles. So we're hoping that we can build that infrastructure out together. I think the private sector is really open to that. How do we allocate and identify and create that space for these vehicles? And second is, right now these dockless programs have been pretty much experimental, a couple hundred bikes or maybe low thousands of bikes, but we really have the potential, the consumer adoption is there to push this into the thousands. And so we're hoping there's some sort of capping mechanism. We can't just have the chaos that was experienced in China. We need some sort of regulatory framework that allows the good vendors to scale alongside their utilization. And I'll throw out one more there that's come out from conversations over the last couple of days, both internally and here at the conference, and that's figuring out good reporting tools. So we can kind of build off the GBFS format, figure out ways to report data and share data in the same way across multiple cities, which will hopefully be better for the cities, get them the data that they need, and better for the private sector vendors that are doing the sharing, and also respect the privacy of the users. So with all that, the next couple of days we have a chance to have some really great cross-pollination between the public sector and private sector, and me and my team, we're just really looking forward to being part of that conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. Now, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Keith Benjamin, the Director of Traffic and Transportation for the City of Charleston, South Carolina. So I have had the privilege of knowing Keith for some years now, and he has always been a listening ear for when I have those days where I'm like, what did I get myself into? And always providing encouraging words. And you've been an inspiration, not just for me, but many in this industry. So it's with honor that I welcome Keith Benjamin.
Good morning, everybody. Oh man, it's wonderful to be here. I'm glad for this opportunity. I got to give some shout outs before I get into what I have to say, because I do have some things to say. Just want to thank all the planners, especially Wafia and Zoe, who have been friends for a long time and allowing me this platform to be able to share some expressions with you today. I also got a few of my folk from Charleston who are here, Megan, Catherine, and Katie, and we're grateful because we are one of the Better Bikeshare Partnership grantees this year, really introducing equity into our Bikeshare system in Charleston, South Carolina, and they've been leading that charge, and we're really excited about that work that's coming out of those particular efforts. And then also, I got my wife and my 16-month-old with me too. Just to put it in perspective, Charleston came in a whirlwind for us. We were in Washington, D.C., and got some phone calls and made some visits. Ended up getting appointed in April of last year, had our son May 1st, drove down with one of my boys on May 22nd, had my wife and little one fly down on the 23rd, started on June 5th, started writing my budget on June 7th. And so no honeymoon, just been running and trying to make this stuff work. But there's a lot that's happening in our city and a lot of things that we're trying to challenge as we shift the system. Let me start out with some questions real quick. How many people in here identify themselves as system changers? All right. How many of you view yourselves as constantly challenging the norm? Okay. I thought I was in the right room. Good. Good. So I do believe that it is time for systems change. But I think I want to challenge us to dig a little bit deeper into what exactly that means and how we define a system, the byproducts of that system, and our responsibility in changing those systems. A system defines itself as a set of connected things or parts forming a complex whole. Quoting the work of the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University, system is defined as itself as an interdependent group of agents working together as a whole. For the sake of this exercise, let's label that as elected officials, planners, engineers, haters, supporters, those of us in this room, everybody, right? Everyone that plays a part in the creation of community and a system in which equity and inequity fight constantly for position. All systems have structure, and those structures matter. All systems create and force behavior, and those behaviors matter. All systems produce positive and negative outcomes, and those positive and negative outcomes matter. It was Seth Godin, author and former executive, who said, systems don't mistreat us, they don't misrepresent us, they don't waste our resources, they don't govern us poorly, they don't support an unfair status quo and generally screw things up. People do. Daniela Meadows, in her book, Thinking in Systems, a Premier, said, if you define a goal of a society or system as gross domestic product, that society will do its best to produce a gross domestic product. It won't produce welfare or equity or justice or efficiency unless we define a goal and regularly measure and report the state of welfare, equity, justice, or efficiency. And MLK himself didn't mince words when he said to accept passively an unjust system is to cooperate with that system. And so I want to challenge us today to not just reduce our definitions of a system to our strategic plans or the pitch decks we give for our particular companies. I wish for myself and for you during this conference time and even on your way home to be critical about the social norms we have either accepted, been uninformed about, ignored, or just been ignorant of that inadvertently, or if we were really honest, purposefully perpetuate the inequity we claim our work, our product, our services alleviate. As a city official, when I came on board, a number of the companies that were just listed up on the board were knocking at our door, asking to engage in our city. And so I don't say this lightly, I just want to be a truth teller. I think for myself and a number of individuals that occupy the space in major cities, our focus is not necessarily on what you're introducing. Our focus is on what you're correcting. Our focus is not on what you're innovating. Our focus is what you're shifting. And so I think that status and thinking in that way as we move systems is something that we cannot ignore. So this is what I want to do today. I want to lay out for y'all 4 different challenges of how we can think about systems and how we can make those system changes. And I want to be clear that I have not mastered these myself. I am building the plane as I fly as well. But I am determined, and it's my hope that that determination is contagious. All right? Let's go through it. So the first one, changing the system requires the acknowledgement of a history that purposefully was in its promotion of inequity. Challenging the system requires the acknowledgement of a history that was purposeful in its promotion of inequity. The way I want to do this, I kind of want to just give two examples, one from my work in Baltimore, and then shift to current status in Charleston. So 3 years ago, this past August, was the death of Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray was a young man who was found with his back severed in the back of a paddy wagon in downtown Baltimore, and it created an uproar, to say the least, in the streets. And I got a phone call from one of my friends who's in the entertainment industry, and he was like, Keith, we got to do something about this. We got to figure this out. And long story short, we got together with a local organization, got together with some celebrities and some everyday folk, and in a week's time raised over $20,000 to do some distributions down near the Gilmore homes where Freddie Gray is from. And when we got down there to do the work, every definition of plight that you can think of was there, and I don't want to give much credence to it, but I'll just leave it at that. But at the same time, there was these aspects of community that we all connect to that were very vivid. People out in the streets, and you're walking down the street, and they give that head nod of hello. People out on their porch grilling and just sharing their food with one another. In fact, we didn't know how to get to the mural site where Freddie Gray, where they did the mural for Freddie Gray. And there was actually a group of kids, maybe 10, 11, 12, who were all on their bikes and rode up and actually directed us to where to go. So all this is happening in the midst of community, and we're doing the distributions, and it's just mind-blowing the level of lack. And behind us was an organization that works with underserved communities on art and how youth can express themselves through art. And in this particular scenario, they were allowing the kids to use chalk and draw out what their feelings about community were in the midst of the situation that was going on. So I looked down to see what's being drawn up, and I am taken aback at what I see. This girl, she was 8 years old, had drawn 3 human traces on the concrete with the names Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, and Trayvon Martin on each chest. And it struck me because at 8 years old, when asked about how to describe her community, the only thing that she could come up with was death. The only thing that she could think about was loss, right? And of course, we could blame that stuff on social and economic things and all those pieces, but for the sake of this conversation, I believe that a big portion of it was place and the historical things that occurred that created the dynamics of her lived environment. And so because I am the nerd that I am, I had to look up how exactly this happened and why did it happen, and how our policies in that particular city and also in the cities that I serve are either exasperating that issue or not acknowledging that issue. And when I dug into it, I saw what I was afraid to see, but it was truth that needed to be acknowledged, and I want to share it with you. In 1943, the Baltimore Association of Commerce proposed a freeway plan to serve anticipated traffic needs and rescue and redeem the central business district. The catch, they needed to get rid of the slums. According to the work of Dr. Raymond Mole at University of Birmingham, he found that the interstates that in 1944, Robert Moses was commissioned to do a report and figure out exactly how they would move about the work and what they would need to do to get rid of the slums. And he decided, and I quote, that if we remove the more of the people of color and slums and wipe them out, the healthier Baltimore will be in the long run. And so the city followed suit, and between 1951 and 1971, 90% of the 25,000 families that were displaced for the build-out of that transportation system were African American. And even in the community where Freddie Gray was from, the Gilmore homes, the plan for the highway system there was never completed. And so that community was completely cut off from any economic opportunity that had its reverberating effects today. Flash forward to now, I have the distinct privilege of being in this position at the city of Charleston. I'm replacing somebody who was holding this position for about 30 years. And so both internally and externally thinking about how we think about transportation and the context in which we think about transportation definitely needed to have some system shifting. And Thankfully, yes, I'm part of a city that is the #1 tourist city in the country and top 10 in the world, and we have huge amount of growth, 34 people moving a day. Our growth rate is 3 times the national average. Our job economy is 4 times the national average. Our millennial population is jumped by 60% in the last 10 years, and we have over $3 billion in economic impact because Volvo, Mercedes, Boeing, Bosch, and a number of other companies have moved to our region. There's a lot that's going on. But there's another side to the coin. Charleston was the nation's capital for the slave trade. Over 40% of the African slaves reaching the British colonies before the American Revolution came through the port of Charleston, the same port that now every BMW X5 and X6 goes in and out of. We were the capital of disparity, and it has its reverberating effects today. The vast majority of Charlestonians are paying about a third of their income for housing. And if you add another 15% of that, that includes transportation. If you're low income, that's about 80% of your income for both transportation and housing. Over 40% of our housing authority residents are dependent on transit, yet out of the 849 bus stops we have in our Tri-County area, less than 10% have a shelter. Our hospitality, food, and beverage workers are the backbone of our community, but only 20% of them live downtown and on an average salary of $23,000 a year. If you don't have a car, how are you going to get to where you need to go? And let's not even sleep on the safety piece. Charleston City and Charleston County is #1 in the state for bike and pedestrian death and injuries, the vast majority of which are of color. We're #2 for speed fatalities, and we're #5 for DUI fatalities. So the truth of the matter is our infrastructure has not leveled up to our transportation design, and it's leaving a lot of people out. For me, to talk about transportation for us here in Charleston is to admit, like many other places, ownership of a motor vehicle of any kind has essentially been a welcome ticket into economic vitality. That ownership meant that you had access, and that access afforded you certain rights and privileges. And now, this did not mean that others did not have ways to get around, but slowly and surely it has been individual motor vehicles that has reigned supreme. Unfortunately, it is because of that fact that there's been a disparity of distribution and transportation, which has translated into the elevation of one mode of transportation over another, based on who the user is, where they are from, where the enforcement is the highest, what assets they're bringing to the table, and our history shows that. Equity in place is not simply the maturation towards inclusion. It is a tailored strategy that closes the gap between opportunity and access, ultimately eliminating privilege. We have a history of transportation being unapologetically used as a tool to exasperate inequity and create greater distance between opportunity and access, and that, I believe, must change. One-way streets as historical aspects of street design institutionalized to allow some in and keep some people out. Measurements in engineering and planning that uphold such discriminatory practices like level of service, a roadway grading system on a scale to A to F, measuring how fast a motor vehicle can pass through an arterial, not even measuring mode shift or mode share. Ordinances that crack the door of profiling, like in Detroit, where at 12 years old or younger, you had to have a letter from a parent or guardian saying you could ride your bike or it could be confiscated by a police officer for up to 6 months. As advocates, as business leaders, we have to welcome the challenge of facing the history that ignited such disparities and make equity a priority. Second challenge. Challenging the system requires us to operate at the intersections, and that pun is definitely intended, right? A few years ago, Brookings Metropolitan Policy Center, they did this study on the top 100 metropolitan cities, and they found that 2/3 of everyday Americans are dealing with multiple disparities at the same time, right? Basically, they are experiencing life. So that's 29 million Americans that don't have a supermarket within a mile if they're in an urban area, or within 10 miles if they're in a rural area. Parents reporting violence and crime as one of the 5 primary factors affecting children's walking or biking. 1/3 of schools in air pollution danger zones. 1/4 of healthcare costs caused by obesity. And 30% of people with disabilities mentioning the fact that transportation is one of their biggest impeding factors for them to be able to access their everyday needs. Though admittedly I'm biased, I do believe that transportation is the common denominator for how communities are built, and transportation is one of those solutionary pieces that can inject itself into the complexity of building community. Basically, if people spend life as a whole and not in silos, I would argue that our solutions shouldn't be siloed either. And transportation can be that intersecting value in that work. I'll put this in another example form for y'all because I think it's important for the context. How many of you all are familiar with the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case? All right, the desegregation of schools. How many of you knew that it started as a transportation issue? Okay, all right. So in 1947, about 65 miles from Charleston, South Carolina, in Clarendon County, there were some black parents that had an issue with the circumstances of their kids' schooling. At that time, the value of South Carolina black school was about $12.9 million, and to white schools, that was $68.4 million. For every pupil in South Carolina, that was $179 for a white child to $43 for a black child, or basically 24 cents on every dollar. This included transportation. The county provided 30 buses to bring white children to larger and better equipped facilities and left black children to walk between 9 and 16 miles a day just to get to school. The parents were not appreciative of this, and ultimately they decided to sue and called on the NAACP and a man by the name of Thurgood Marshall to come to Charleston, South Carolina and argue the case. The case was brought before a council of judges, 3 judges, and unfortunately was not approved of, but there was a dissent by one of the U.S. District Judges, Waring, and in his dissent, he stated specifically that segregation in education can never produce equality and called it an evil that must be eradicated. It was his dissent that triggered in Thurgood that we need to take this bigger than just transportation and talk about schooling overall. 3 years later, he brings it to the Supreme Court with 4 other cases, and ultimately the schools were desegregated through that case. As we think about equity, I believe that it is the intentional elimination of disparities disproportionately impacting marginalized people in a community. It is the joining together to make proactive steps in embracing the complexity of experiences, elevating the potency of inclusion, exposing the creativity in every community, demanding honesty and calling out racism and oppression, both overt and systematic, and striving to co-empower citizens to implement goals. Equity is achieved when no one is blocked from reaching their full potential due to their race, their gender, their sex, their disability, their economic position, or other socioeconomic determinants. In Charleston, like any other city around the country, discrimination and racialized segregation played a major role in creating significant economic impact in housing and transportation, disparities that still have its reverberating effects today. It is imperative that the division for the work that you and I do does not perpetuate inequities by treating mobility, livability, and safety as an option or something that's inaccessible. It is important to recognize not only the opportunities to envision a new community building effort for all citizens, but also the need to face the challenges that presently exist. In order to do that, I believe that we have to be effective in offering our transportation solutions within the context of people's lived experiences, especially for those people who are on the fringes and who are forgotten, but statistically are more prone to do things like bike. Third challenge for you to consider, and this I think is a hard one, but we have to acknowledge it. Changing the system requires graduating from just embracing equity as a word and instead infusing it into our strategic plans, our contract negotiations, our hiring practices, and decision-making tables. And because I know that gets into everybody's business, I'll use myself as an example. All right. There's 2 things that I did when I came on board at the department. The first thing, as many of you know who might be in the consultant space, to be an on-call firm for a municipality a county, a state, DOT, has a lot of privileges. It allows you to be duly connected with decision makers. It allows you to understand what work is happening, where opportunities are, but also it's guaranteed funds every year, quite frankly. And it's something that is very much coveted. When I came on board, I had 6 on-call firms, and for our city, it's a 5-year contract. Essentially, any project that I would want done that's under $39,999, they can do, and I don't have to take to city council and ask permission for it. So again, it's coveted. And when I looked through the list of firms, I saw no diversity whatsoever. No diversity of capabilities, skill sets, people, otherwise. And so I canceled the contract. And for those familiar with that, you know that made some folk have one tear come out of the right eye. And in fact, I had one of the firms, she came to my office and you know, started asking questions. It was like, we got this letter, like, is everything okay? And I was like, everything's all right. Let's make sure you look at the scope and fill out what you need to fill out. And so I rewrote the entire scope of what was expected for the on-call firms. I was displeased by the fact that there wasn't the elevation of those capable firms that were DBEs, women-owned business, veteran-owned businesses. Even in the scoring criteria that's reviewed for the contract opportunity to have the status of a DBE, women-owned business, or veteran-owned business was only 5 points out of 100 points for a scoring criteria. So I changed it to 20 because I have the right to do that. And I'm pleased today to see that we have 7 on-call firms, and the vast majority of them are either women-owned, those who are owned by folk of color, or those who are veteran-owned, who are capable of doing the work. Second thing I did, I am a product of people who paused their purpose for a moment to help me fulfill mine. And so I would feel it would be arrogant of me to occupy this space and not create opportunity for somebody else. And so this summer, we had 2 paid interns in our office, specifically from Charleston. One of them, he's a rising sophomore, a mechanical engineer at Howard University and a cornerback on their football team. And the other is starting his freshman year at Benedict College from the Upper Peninsula, one of the most impoverished areas of our city, and in partnership with the state DOT, was able to pay his way to be a part of the internship program so we can have some experience going into his first year of college. We also partnered with the local chamber and also one of the trade schools, Trident Technical College, to introduce an apprentice into our signals division who will be with us for the next 2 years. He's actually in high school. So he's going to be finishing high school, working part-time at our department, and then full-time during the summer while also taking associate's classes in computer engineering. I think that if we are serious about changing systems, then we have to admit to ourselves that it's not enough to just give money to a cause or to sign onto a statement or to meet the check boxes for how many women or people of color quotas that we have. I think it requires us really embracing the title of catalyst and being unapologetic in ripping down the no trespassing fences that have erected over time. Because I think it's important that you walk away with some to-dos, right? I got work to do, you got work to do, but there's more work that we have to do. I want to lay out these questions for you to think about both throughout this conference and on your way home. What is missing from your definition of for all? Who is not in this room from your company, your organization, or your community that needs to be a part of this conversation? Have you institutionalized equity at your company or organization, or have you just hired or partnered with it? Who do you need to welcome in that you've been holding back because of the accountability you will then be responsible for? Where do you see the opportunities to co-empower a community leader or advocacy partner to lead? And finally, does your company objectives offer your service as a part of the solution to community building, especially for communities that are dependent on your service, but also have experienced significant neglect? Fourth and final point, and then I'll sit my behind down. Changing the system does not have specific qualifications, just a willingness to be a part of the shift. Changing the system does not have specific qualifications, just a willingness to be a part of the shift. If you make your way to the National African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and you go to the second floor, you'll see a door to a Volkswagen van, and it is owned by a guy from our city on Johns Island by the name of Esau Jenkins. Esau Jenkins had a 4th grade education and owned a farm on Johns Island with his wife. And in the 1940s saw an issue. He did not understand why his neighbors' kids had no direct way to be able to get to the naval base that was downtown, or to be able to get to school. And so he got together with a couple of his folk and got some buses together and started transporting them from Johns Island to the peninsula and back and forth. While they were on the buses, he was teaching them the Constitution, because at that time, in order for you to get registered to vote, you had to quote different pieces of the Constitution. And if it was in his mind that if he wasn't the only person who was empowered to speak up for himself, then change might happen. And so he did both of those things simultaneously. And he was one of the first people I read up on when I came to Charleston, because history is very important to our city, and it's important to our decision-making process. And he had some writings, and there was a small piece that he gave that I think is important for me to hold to myself, but also for me to share with you. He said, "I asked myself this question some time ago, am I my brother's keeper?" And the answer I got was, "You are." And so I decided that I'm no better than the next person, and I'm also no worse than the next person. So I decided to do all I can to help people in order to help myself. If you notice in the historical representations that I gave on today, all of them occurred at generally the same time, like 1940s, 1950s time. If you look at the history of that time period, there was a lot brewing during that time. And I would argue that today we're in the midst of another brewing time. And I would like to encourage you to catch that brewing and not sit on the sides of the challenges that we see today, but accept the fact that there's an opportunity for us to rewrite history and not just have multiple modes of transportation, but also multiple people and multiple experiences engaging in those modes of transportation. That you would accept the challenge that the work that we do is not just about getting people on bikes, but about building community. That you would accept the challenge that it's not just enough for us to have engaging coffees about the word equity, but that it has to be infused into our strategic plans and also be sitting around our board tables. And that finally, that we would accept the challenge that we don't have to disqualify ourselves from being engaged in the work because of what we perceive to be shortcomings on our part or what we do or don't have. There's a lot of work to do. I know I have a lot of work to do. I know you have a lot of work to do, and I think we have to do this work together. See y'all on the battlefield.
Keith, thank you. And as you said, we got a lot of work to do, y'all. You got your homework assignment. You got the rest of the week to work on it and continue to work on it as you go back home. And as Keith mentioned, we have to do it together. It's not a separate city, separate group, separate operation. Everyone needs to work together, move forward together to make real change. So that ends our open and plenary. I just wanted to give a few little tips and things for you guys to remember. So our conference hashtag is Bikeshare Conference 2018. Be sure to post, tag, share your experiences, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever you use. And also, if you haven't already checked out our SCAD mobile online agenda app, you can see all of the workshops, breakout sessions, all the people here, bios, and all of that on SCAD. And also, I wanted to just mention those of you who were interested in the GEAR Level 2 training. That'll be this afternoon between 1:15 and 4:15. A lot will be talked about, some of the things that Keith mentioned about equity and about this just not being something that's happening today, but something that's institutionalized in a lot of these systems and needs to be talked about. So yes, without further ado, welcome and please enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.